Broadcast. All right.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so I think we are live now. We have more than 140 viewers. I'll introduce myself. I am Ashwini. I work with Google and I'm helping with this course at IIT Kanpur. I'll let Dr. Satya introduce himself now.
Um, Hi, I'm Satyadev. I'm the instructor of the course, currently live in a question answer session. So hopefully this should help you, especially with the first assignment. Okay, let's get into the questions.
Okay, so I'm going to now start projecting the questions that have been posted by the students and voted. So we will go through the most voted questions first and then go through them one by one. Uh,
Okay.
so I think you can start, Satya.
Yeah. So maybe you can pick the first. Okay. So after completing the course, what sort of certificates will we get? How are they useful? Does the certificate have some value? Okay. As far as I understand, this certificate is provided by the Continuing Education Center at IIT Kanpur. So whichever IIT is running the particular course, they will certify, and they are useful in the sense that we'll certify that you have completed the course and taken an exam and got a certain percentage in the exam. Now it is up to whoever takes this certificate to see what value they consider this. For example, if a company wants to look at the certificate and says that, okay, this is like a minimum proficiency in C programming, they can do it. Yeah, so this certificate is provided by the Continuing Education Center and at IIT Kanpur and in collaboration with NPTEL. And
I would like to add there that the certificate sort of guarantees that the student has written an exam and has passed the exam as per the requirements set by this course. And so it is a proof in some sense for any prospective companies where students will want to apply for jobs, and they can show this certificate, and the companies can then confirm that yes, this is indeed given by the continuing education program of NIIT.
okay, so maybe we can proceed to the next question.
Yes.
Okay. So this question is about pre-increment and post-increment in the C programming language. So pre-increment is, uh, let's say that I is an integer variable and you say plus plus I, and post-increment is when, let's say, I is an integer variable and you say I plus plus. Um, well, at this stage of the course, I would like to say that uh, the exact way in which these operators work is an advanced topic, and in my opinion, it should be taught in a course on compilers rather than a course on the C introductory programming using the C language. Um, Many of these expressions are either undefined or compiler dependent. Um, and in short, I'll just make a remark now, and later I plan to post a video explaining the details of this operation. So the short answer is that the pre-increment operator increments the value of I and then returns the incremented value. So let's say I equal to 0 and you say plus plus I. Um, what happens is that I is incremented by 1 and the value of the expression is 1. Now, post increment, on the other hand, is slightly more tricky. Um, the value that it returns is the previous value of I. So the value of the expression plus I plus plus is actually 0 if I was 0. But then after the expression is over, it increments the value of I. So then after the expression is over, I becomes 1. Now, the whole issue and the whole confusion comes by the exact definition of after. So, what does it mean for an expression to be over, so that post increments can now be completed? So, this is a very advanced topic in C and involves a concept called sequence points. Um, I would, at this point, I would like to just say that an understanding of this issue does not enhance your programming skills. So if you're an introductory programmer, this is not the topic that you should be focusing on. It's a slightly tricky topic, and if you want to really understand it, we will post a video at the end. And I would like to emphasize that this topic is optional. It does not really relate to your programming skill, but some uh, books have these annoying exercises. Many of the answers are actually wrong. So because some of this behavior is actually either compiler dependent or actually undefined. So
Yeah,
we will not go into these in greater detail. At the end, I will post an optional video. If people want to really understand it, they can take a look at it. But it's just tangential to this course.
Yeah, I would like to add that as a good programming practice, complex expressions like these should not be used in the program because of two reasons. One, Dr. Satya already said that the behavior is undefined. And the second is that these expressions do not make for code, programming code which you can easily read. It is very difficult to read code which is written in complex expressions like this, and so they should not be used is a recommendation. So let's go to the next question. I think this question, because of voting, came up now. This is the
Yeah.
non-ASCII characters question.
Oh, right. Okay, so I missed that. So the non-ASCII characters in C, okay, if you're talking about ANSI C, it is not possible to print these characters. When you say a character in the standard C programming language, it is this 128 characters, some of which are actually non-printable characters. Um, Now, if you are coding in Linux, there are settings like locale that you can use to print these additional characters. Uh, we are not going to system specific programming in C. So it is true that if you're working in an operating system like Linux, you can print the euro symbol and the pound symbol in a C programming language, but this is not standard C. It is extensions, which we don't intend to cover in this course. Ashwini, something
No,
to add?
this is, yeah, thanks. I think that's a sufficient answer. Okay, let's go to the next question.
Yeah. So what are modifiers, qualifiers, flag, and field width in C? So um, these are the modifiers that are usually used in printf um, and sometimes in scanf. So uh, I think the short answer to this is that uh, you may want to specify the output format really particularly. For example, you may want the output to be right justified rather than left justified. What it means is that if you're printing a bunch of numbers in, column after column, you might want the numbers to end aligned to the right rather than aligned to the left, which is the common behavior. Similarly, if you're printing octal numbers or hexadecimal numbers, you would want to clearly indicate that these are not decimal values. So there are some options in printf which give you greater control over the output format. And these are known as modifiers, qualifiers, flags, field width, and so on. The easiest thing to do would be that I would post a link to the to a manual page for printf which describes these things in detail with examples. Um, yeah, um, that's
Okay.
what I have. So we'll post a detailed chart on how exactly you can print in with greater control.
And for
This is a
students who would like to find this, just do a internet search on these four words: modifier, qualifier, flag, and field width in C. Just put this whole question in an internet search engine, and you will get lots of pages with detailed explanation of this. And we will add it to the lesson in the course also.
In short, it is to give greater control in printf than what is normally available.
Okay. Next question.
Okay, so what is the difference between main, int main, and void main? Okay, a very brief answer. Um, so the int in int main is what is known as return type. So you will see this when you see the videos on functions. Every function returns some value, and that value has a type. So, for example, main returns some integer. By convention, this comes from Unix programming and later Linux. By convention, main, if it executes successfully, it returns a zero. And if it returns unsuccessfully, then it returns a non-zero value. Void main is just old style usage, and these days it is discouraged. So you're encouraged to use int main. And for just the word name, what happens if you just write the word name? By default, if you define a function in C and not declare the return type, it is taken as int. So main is equivalent to int main, and void main is old style programming in C and these days not encouraged.
So although the compiler will not give you error on void main, which means your local compiler, our online compiler is very strict about this thing. We have set it like that, and therefore void main will give you runtime. Void main will give you an error. Int main is fine. Main will be assumed as int main, and if you don't do return zero at the end of your program, which signifies correct execution, then also you will get a runtime error. So if you don't return anything, or if you return a non-zero value, then you get a runtime error in the online compiler. Your local compiler will ignore the return value. Your local operating system will ignore any non-zero return value, but in the online compiler, we are strict about that also. So let's move. I think one more point about this question is that main is also a function, and we should
Yeah,
remember. So
right.
main is called by the operating system, and when you go and create your own functions will be called within your program, but main is called by the operating system to begin executing your program.
Okay. So the next question is, what is the use of flush in C programming? Okay, I'm surprised that this got so many votes. It's a slightly obscure thing, and we intend to cover this in when we cover files right at the very end. As you can see, the first F in flush is basically file flush. Um, okay, so why do you normally use flush? This is this is because okay, uh, so you have certain input buffers and certain output buffers by which C manages its input output. And flush says that the user's output buffer should be immediately flushed. So whatever is currently in the buffer and has not been printed yet, you should print them immediately. If it is an input buffer and you say flush, then I think the whatever is in the buffer and which has not been read yet will just be discarded. You just throw it away. The reason why you use these things slightly tricky. For example, there may be situations in your program when you really want to know at what point your code is currently executing. And for technical reasons, printfs need not happen immediately. So whenever you see, whenever the code says printf, it's not that it will print that thing immediately and move on to other things. There may be a delay, and a flush says print it immediately, flush everything. Um, yeah, it's a technical. Yeah, it's a very useful function, but why you need it, um, we haven't seen such situations yet. Yeah,
Okay.
so I'm surprised that that so many people had this doubt. Okay.
Well, it may be because it is an unknown situation, and so students were concerned what this is. Uh,
Okay.
let's move to the next question then. This is very
Yeah.
important because a lot of students might actually be having errors. So, yeah.
Okay. If conio.h is not a standard header, then why do we even need to use this? Well, okay. I guess the question is, should we use conio.h if it is not a standard header? If it's not a standard header. So conio.h, if I understand correctly, it's a turbo C header, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So it's used for input output in turbo C, and I think it has some features which are extra to what is there in stdlib,
Yes,
stdi.h.
yes,
But
yes.
okay, so the thing is that conio.h is not a standard C programming language header. Um, so the point is that the online compiler does not recognize this header, which is why you might get some compilation errors. Um, so you don't need to, yeah, you don't need to do this. So the problem is that if people write and compile their code in Turbo C compiler where it doesn't complain, and you have these additional input-output features. But then when you try to compile it in the online compiler, it takes the GCC compiler, and GCC compiler does not recognize this header because it's not a standard C programming language header. So we would discourage this strongly. Even if you're coding in Turbo C, don't use conio.h for input output. Use stdio.h.
Yes, and it's a big if you are using Turbo C. You should not be using Turbo C because you should just see the copyright notice in Turbo C, and it was released in 1992 or 1993, I think. So
Yeah.
using a 20-year-old compiler means you are using 20-year-old features. For example, Turbo C was released at a time when we had 16-bit computers, and so the maximum size of an integer is 16 bits according to Turbo C. But today we are moving and we are mostly using 64-bit computers or 32-bit computers and compilers. So it will give you incorrect result. So this is just one of the reasons of not using Turbo C, that it's too old. Other reasons are that you will learn some non-standard practices, for example, using conio.h, and again, that will not help you later if you try to use it in more complex programs. And many, many more reasons why we are recommending to use the GCC compiler using MinGW on Windows or GCC on Linux or Mac.
Okay. The next is why are expressions like I equal to I plus plus and I equal to plus plus I discouraged in some books? Well, if you're reading a book that does not discourage this, then I would recommend to buy a different book. Um, uh, so the C standard clearly says that both these expressions are undefined. The result of these. So again, it's the same pre-increment, post-increment issue, and we will revisit this in later in a greater in greater detail in a later video. So let's just move on to okay, what is the difference between counter controlled and sentinel controlled loops? Let me just uh, state that in simpler words. I guess the question is about certain problems where you say that um, you want to execute this loop for let's say n times. Maybe you have to read n numbers and you know n in advance. That is called a counter controlled loop. And sentinel controlled loop is where you don't know how many how many input items there will be, but you will be given a condition something like maybe you read until you see the first minus one. So sentinel in that sense, it's a symbol which says okay, the input has ended. Um, the difference between counter controlled and sentinel control loops, it depends on the problem and your approach to the solution. So when you're writing a loop and you want to say that the loop is over, so when is the loop over? There may be situations where the problem given is that you know that a matrix that is being input is of size n cross n. So when you code that up, you would code that up using a nested loop where I goes from say 0 to n minus 1 and j goes from 0 to n minus 1. That would be a counter control loop because you already know n in advance. Whereas sentinel control loops, yeah, I mean, you may be, let's say, reading a sentence in English, and you know that you have to keep on reading the sentence until you see a full stop. Okay, so the full stop um, is a symbol that says, okay, the sentence is ended. It's not that a sentence has fixed like 100 letters. That's not the case. So it depends on the problem. Counter controlled is when you know how many steps to execute in advance, and sentinel is where you don't know in advance, but while processing, you say that okay, now I have to stop this loop.
Okay, thank you. Uh, Next question about loop invariance.
Okay, loop invariance is a concept that helps you to think clearer about loops. So whenever you write a loop, just before you enter the next execution of a particular loop, there may be some condition that is always valid. So if you just go into some of the videos on the early loop programs, you will see that every time you enter the loop, for example, let's say that you are summing up n natural numbers that are being input. Okay. Now, the loop, so we'll write a loop which says, okay, read the next number, add it to the current sum, and so on. So the loop invariant for that will be saying that sum is the sum of numbers read so far. Now, let's be clear that before you enter the loop, you have not read a number so far. Okay, and at that point, sum is 0. So before you enter the loop, sum is the number of elements, is the sum of elements read so far. That is clear. After you read the sum and after you read the number and add it to the sum, again you come back to the loop. So at that point, again you can say that sum is the sum of elements read so far. So the idea is that if you think about loop invariance, it helps you to handle many of the loop bugs that people write. For example, a very common bug is when you don't initialize a variable properly. So while the loop is executing, something may work, but let's say that you encounter an empty input or some boundary case, and then the code gives you a wrong answer. So in order to prevent this, it's helpful to think about what is the one condition that is always true before you execute the loop again. That is the concept of the loop invariant. And when you think about it clearer, like what is the exact loop invariant that you can say about the program, um, chances are very low that you will have a bug in the loop, especially bugs like when the input is empty or when the input is more than n and so on. So,
Uh,
yeah.
okay. I would like to just point out that we will these questions can also be later on asked on the discussion forum, and other students can also answer each other so that some of this is learned. If you are unable to follow in the live class what is going on, the live class will be available in a recorded format later, and you can also ask questions on the discussion forum later if something is not clear. So with that, let's go to the next question. This is a very important application question.
Okay. How to increase problem solving ability and relate programming concepts to real world problems? Well, I don't know. How do you increase problem solving ability? By solving more problems. Um, that's the long and short of it. Um, so I would, in addition to the problems that we pose, I would recommend you to um, have a book at hand and try solving the problems, exercises in the book. For example, you can two books I could recommend is one is this Shom series in C programming, and a more advanced book is Kernighan Ritchie's C programming book. Exercises in the first are more or less approachable, even if you're a beginning programmer. Kernighan and Ritchie is slightly more tricky. And once you do these exercises, first of all, it gives you a better handle on how to think about these kind of problems. And second, um, yeah, second, the more problems you solve by yourself, it gives you the right way of thinking about these issues in a programmatic manner. So yeah, as with everything, practice improves your skill.
Yeah,
Uh,
so that is the only way, and there are some programming contests and websites which give students lots of different programming problems to solve. So students should try to uh, use those websites also. One of the very important programming contests is called ACM ICPC. I will write the name here. And for students who would like to try solving more complex problems of competition level, this contest is very useful. Uh, I think, Dr. Satya, you should answer the second part of the question about how to relate this to a real world problem.
well, okay. This is not clear to me. What do you mean by relating programming concepts to real world problems? Because as with everything, I mean, for example, mathematics, the idea is that you take a real world problem and model it in whatever you want to do. Okay, so suppose you want, okay, I don't know exactly what kind of real world problems you have in your mind. For example, let's say that you want to write a scheduler for um, some event. Okay. So multiple people have different timetables, and you want to schedule a particular event. Um, so how would you, first of all, how would you write an algorithm that solves this problem? You have to abstract away certain issues in the so it is not important. For example, what is the name of the person? It may not be important. It depends on how you model it. So this is more or less a question about modeling the real world and making it precise enough so that you can write a program for it. Uh, I will not say that this course is meant for that. This course is meant for something else. It is for the second level. So suppose somebody has abstracted out a real world problem and made it so precise that now you can take that problem statement and write a program for it. Um, so that is the level at which this course is running. Taking real world problems and modeling it so that you can write programs to solve it, I think is more of a software engineering field. And it's slightly more advanced than what this course is meant for. Maybe Ashwini can add to this.
No, I think you're absolutely right that real world problem means if I can assume something about it, it means questions and problems that people encounter in everyday life. It could be about making a payment for something. It could be about booking a train ticket, and these are important real world problems. And as long as some amount of thinking has been done to develop the right algorithm to solve the problem, then the programmer's job is to take that algorithm and convert it into code which the computer will run. And so we are at the level of converting algorithms to code, and that is where programming is important. Creating the algorithm itself for small problems is okay and it's part of this course, but for more complex and higher level problems, it is a separate subject in itself. So go to the next question.
Yeah.
I think this question is sort of incomplete, but Dr. Satya, would you like to try answering this?
Okay, so the question is that how do you handle very large integer manipulations? I'm assuming in the C programming language. So there are different data types. For example, int, which depending on the machine you are using. For example, if you're using a 32-bit operating system, then an integer would be 32 bits wide, and on a 64-bit it will be longer, and so on. And if you want longer data type, you could, for example, use long. But all these standard data types have upper limits. Um, so you could, so using long, typically you can handle larger integers than using int. And again, this depends on the machine that you are executing in. There is um, there's a different question here, which is handling arbitrary sized integers. If you want to write code that can handle um, integers of any size, you cannot do this using standard data types in C. So you cannot do it using int, long. All of them have upper limits. The upper limit of long is larger than the upper limit of int, but still long has an upper limit. Um, so if you want to handle arbitrarily large integers, you will have to do it yourself using facilities like arrays, which we will cover soon.
Okay. Also, in C, you can use it, you can do large integer manipulations using arrays, and later on, more advanced and not covered in this course is something called linked list, and those could be used. And then C++ allows students to create the programmers to create their own data types, and some of this goes into the area of C++ also, which is not covered in this course, but interested students can read about it using the internet or using the right books.
Okay, so when we come to arrays, we will give some of these problems as exercises, and then you can think about it in greater detail. Okay, sir, I'm used to using dev C++ compiler instead of GCC. What are the differences between them? Maybe Ashwini can answer this one.
Yeah, well, actually, Dev C++ is not a compiler. It is something called IDE. IDE means Integrated Development Environment, and it is a very big word. But to give a short answer to that, an IDE is a software where the editor, the compiler, the linker, and the debugger come together in a single interface. So Dev C++ is an IDE where all these different things like editor, compiler, debugger is all together. Actually, Dev C++ uses GCC as its compiler. So if you install Dev C++, it will install GCC at its backend, and it will run compilations from GCC, but it will be transparent to you as a user. So, well, well, the difference is one is an IDE, the other is a compiler. And these are some of the reasons why we are trying to discourage the use of IDE in this course, because some of these details are not visible when you use an IDE. And so learning all the different pieces of the compile and programming process is harder. And that is why we are trying to encourage the use of command line compiler and using a separate editor so that students see everything, more detail of what is going on. But if you want to use dev C++, sure, you can use it. Anyway, it uses GCC at its backend.
Okay, so the next question is, what is the use of C or C++ programming in the current software IT industry? Um, Again, I think one thing I will add to this, and I think Ashwini should answer this more appropriately. But one thing I would say about this is that there is still a large code base written in C and C++. So, for example, if you want to go into systems programming, networking, and these kind of programming issues, the language of choice is still C. Similarly, C++ programming, um, there's a lot of software written these days using C++. Um, but
Yes.
if you're going into these niche areas like systems programming, embedded programming, and so C is absolutely vital. In the larger programming context like web programming, I'm not sure whether C or C++ are the languages of choice.
So I
So
would like to add that in even large web systems and in companies where large internet systems are developed, C++ is a very important programming language. You may not develop web applications, web pages in C++. You might use languages like JavaScript for developing web pages, but the server systems which run web pages and which give you results on web pages are written for a large percentage in C++ or in the Java programming language. So C++ is absolutely very important for the current software or IT industry. And as Dr. Satya said, C is very important for any kind of systems work, embedded systems work, uh, any kind of work that involves interaction with hardware at a very direct level. C is very important there.
okay, we'll move on. What is a format specifier like percentage D and percentage C in scan? Okay, I guess there are two questions here. What is a format specifier in scan and printer? So
Yeah,
the
the first part is about the scanf format specifier. And the
yeah,
second part of the question is why is ampersand not used with the
yeah,
variable in
I think
printf?
both of these questions are interesting. So the format specifiers, let's say there are two cases. One is in printf and the other is in scanf. In printf, when you use, let's say, percentage %d, this means take the value in the variable and print it out as an integer. Now, if the variable is an integer anyway, then it says just print the value. But maybe there are other cases like you have a float variable and for some reason you print it out as an integer. So these are very specific cases. But it says take the value in the variable, convert it, and print it as an integer. That's the purpose of a format specifier in printf. In scanf, it has the opposite purpose. The user has entered some data, and uh, scanf says that data try and read it as an integer. So if you look at one of the videos on ASCII code, I have tried to explain what happens when the user enters 1, 2, okay, the digit 1 followed by the digit 2, and the user has two different cases. One is trying to read it as an integer using percentage %d, and trying to read it as a character using %c. When you read it as an integer, it will be taken as the number 12. When you read it using a character, only the first character will be scanned, and it will get converted into the ASCII character 1. So kindly refer to that video. It tries to explain what format specifiers do in scanner. The other question is very important. Why do we say printf %d a, and when you want to do scanf, you would say scanf %d ampersand and a. So the exact answer to this is that it has to do with pointers. And when we cover pointers, I will mention this particular thing in greater detail. The idea is that printf just uses the value which is there in the variable a and prints it out. So in some sense, it does not modify a. It just looks at, okay, what is the current value of a, and just prints it out. Scanf, on the other hand, has a more difficult task. It has to take the user input and change the value of a. So basically, it has to take the user input and put it in the variable called a. So scanf definitely modifies the variable a, and the way to do that is by using pointers. So the ampersand or the AND operator is the addressing operator used in C, and we'll see exactly what that means when we discuss pointers. So the short answer is that scanf has to use a pointer, and printf need not use a pointer. That's why things are the way it is.
Okay. Um, so next question.
Yeah. So what is the difference between double A 1.1 and float B 1.1? Okay, so again there are two questions. The first question is what is the difference between double and float? Um, in machines, double says so float says that it's a floating point with a certain precision, and double says that it's a floating point number with double that precision. Okay, so floating point uses 32 bits, maybe double would use 64 bits. So it has earlier I had discussed a situation where you had to change from int to long because you would have larger integers. Similarly, for floating point numbers, you may need more number of digits after the decimal place. So then what float supports. So in those cases, you would use a double. The second part is why if a equal to b is not executed. Oh, right. Okay, so the question, if I may recast it, is if you had declared these variables a equal to 1.1, which is a double, and b equal to 1.1, which is a float, and then you try to test it as a equal to b, um, it may not be true. Uh, this is because the floating point representation will convert the number that you wrote into the closest number that C can represent. Okay. So maybe there are numbers that the the machine cannot represent exactly. So there is some approximation, and the kind of approximation that happens for float may be slightly different from the approximation that happens for double. Again, in this case, this is not a machine-specific issue. What happens here will be consistent across all machines that support floating point numbers. So it's not really a machine-specific issue, but it is a technical issue, and we may not explain this in this course at all. It is so the general rule is that when you're dealing with floating point numbers or double precision numbers, and you want to test for equality, the safe thing to do is to say not exactly equal, but you would say that A and B are fairly close to each other. And how do you say A and B are fairly close to each other? You would look at A minus B and B minus A and ensure that both of them are small. So if they are equal, you would expect A minus B and B minus A to be both 0. But this may not be exactly true. So you would say that I will pick a small error that I can live with, And if a minus b and b minus a are both within that error, then I'll say that a and b are equal as far as I am concerned. So you have to treat integer equality and floating point equality slightly differently. It's a technical issue. It is not a undefined issue or a machine specific issue. But still, we may not get into this in this course.
Okay. All right. One more question, but this is not exactly a Turbo C++ question.
Right. Can we make our own header files in GCC or Turbo C++ compilers? Yes, in both compilers you can create your own header files. We may get okay, we will get to this in the last portion of the course, where I'll explain how do you create programs where you want to write your programs in multiple files. All of the programs that we have written so far are within a single file. So when we come into that issue, like how do you split the code in multiple files, then we'll discuss how do you create your own header files.
Again, I'd like to point out that the reason why a programmer would like to have the code into many different files is because after small programs, if you try to do any project, then the size of the code becomes very large. And in order to keep logically code together and nicely organized, multiple files are recommended. Single file code will very soon become too large and too difficult to maintain. So multiple files are used. Also, in when you go to jobs in the software industry, then you will find that it's not one programmer that works on a project. It is always a team. And again, logically dividing the code into multiple files is useful so that different programmers work on different files, and then when the time to compile happens, then they are all compiled together. So header files are useful in splitting the code over multiple files, and both compilers can do that. Okay, I will answer the next question. This is
Yes.
presentation error, and this is related to the online compiler. So, when students are trying to compile their and run their programs, sometimes presentation error is coming. And right now we have set the compiler to ignore the presentation error, which means you will still get marks even if this error happens. So don't worry about marks, even if presentation error is showing, you will get proper marks. But what is the error itself? Uh, we are expecting you to give some kind of output. Let's say we are expecting you to print the something like a matrix or the result of a matrix or any number or any pattern. And when you print it, if there is a mismatch between your output and our output in terms of extra spaces at the end. So maybe our output is expecting a new line character in the end, but your output is not printing the new line character. These little differences are called presentation error in the online compiler, and that is why you get that message. Like I said before, we have set the compiler to ignore these errors, so you will get marks. So don't worry about marks over here, but the error is about a mismatch in extra spaces at the end of your output.
Okay. The next question is, if there is no difference between for and while, why both, and what is the difference? I mean, um, well, um, both the facilities are given in the language, and what is the difference? You cannot write code. You cannot write any more code using for than you can do with while, and conversely. So you cannot write any more code using while than you can do with for. But there are certain situations in which for is a natural thing to write. For example, if you're writing a very simple loop where, let's say that it's a variable I going from 0 to 10, and you increment I by 1 every time, then it's a very clear loop. And you just, by writing a for loop, all the information about the loop will be present in one place, and You can easily see what is happening. On the other hand, maybe you're writing a loop where there may be multiple conditions to get outside the loop. So in the for loop, which I just described, as soon as you hit I equal to 10, you exit out of the loop. In the case of a while, in the case of another loop that you want to write, let's say for a different problem, there may be like multiple conditions to exit. You may not, in those cases, want to write a for loop because if you want to list out all the exit conditions in the for loop, it might look like a very complicated expression. In those cases, maybe while loop is better. Again, it's a matter of personal choice whether you use for loops and while loops. Both of them are available and both of them are equivalent in the sense that you can, if you have a for loop program, you can convert to a while loop. Well, the language provides multiple facilities. This is because there are multiple ways to write the same code. Um, yeah, I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but the point is that yeah, there are these multiple facilities and they are equivalent. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we will take this next question. I think that got voted down, and I think we have only about 5 minutes more for the live class. So I
Okay.
will. So I think I'll just scroll through, and Satya, you should choose which one to answer, which is most relevant to the course current state of the course, because
Okay.
we will have more live classes and advanced
Okay.
questions you
So
can
I
answer
just
later.
yeah, I think the when we write int a, what value does a contain? Is it zero? Okay, I think this is a very relevant and important point that I want to emphasize. Uh, when you just write int a and don't initialize it, uh, then you cannot assume any particular value of a, especially zero. Okay, so that you technically say that a contains garbage value. That doesn't mean that a contains some junk value. What it means is that you cannot assume that a can be some specific value like zero. It could, when you try to print out a immediately, you may get a value like, let's say, minus 10,032 or something. So if you just declare a variable and don't assign it, you cannot assume that it is zero. So this is the source of many errors. So always properly initialize a variable before you use
Okay.
it.
All right. I think pointers will come later, so we will skip this
Pointers will
question.
come later. The
Uh,
character is not
Cat,
allowed.
it's not allowed, and we just discussed in the question about int and void main that int is the only main return data type. Uh, what about this question? This is
How
this is
to input
re-
n
this is, this
matrix
is
without
related to. I think this is related to the assignment on the
this is
triangular matrix.
related to the assignment. So I would like to just say that uh, there are problems on arrays where you don't need to hold the array. So for example, if you have a very simple array problem where you just want to say that whether the array is entirely zero or whether it contains at least one non-zero element. Now it is not necessary to remember the array. You can just read element one by one. As soon as you see a non-zero element, you say that okay, it's not a zero array. So there are some problems on arrays. There are some problems on matrices which don't require you to remember the whole matrix. This is not true of all matrix problems, but this should be a hint for some of the problems in the assignment that maybe since we have not covered arrays, these problems can be solved just by scanning the array once and without remembering it or going back and seeing what happened before. So
Okay.
hopefully that is helpful.
Yeah, I think that is important that there's some problems where storing the matrix is not required. I will give one more example. If you just want to sum all the elements of the matrix, you can basically read all the elements of the matrix one by one, keep adding them to a sum variable, and print out the sum in the end without storing the matrix itself. So arrays are not required again. I think we should skip the return value of printf scanf. We
Yeah.
should skip.
So these are standard things you should look it up.
Yeah, and
Uh,
return values of printf, scanf you can find from an internet search also. I
yeah,
think
we
this is
will.
an important question, the zero on submitting assignment.
Okay, so I think you should answer this question.
Yeah, so this is a very common question on the discussion forum. There is nothing wrong with the online compiler. Hundreds and thousands of students are submitting and getting marks, so please don't think there is something wrong over there. Now, how we have designed the assignments is that the test cases that you see are for you to test your program, whether on the online compiler or on your own computer. So you can see the test cases, input them in the program on your own computer, see whether the desired output is coming or not. And when you test it on the online compiler, the compiler tells you whether the test case is passed or not. But remember that the test cases that are shown to you are not the only test cases in the assignment, and the given or the visible test cases are not used for scoring your marks. When you click on submit on the assignment screen, another set of test cases which are hidden from you, they run on the online on your program, and those test cases are used for scoring. If we show you all the test cases, then the discipline of following the problem statement properly and all will get defeated. So we want you to test your program using the given test cases, but it should work for the problem statement that has been specified to you. And the hidden test cases will test your program for those the the inputs defined as per the problem statement, and you get marks on that. So you can pass the visible test cases, but if you get a zero on submitting, it means hidden test cases are failing. It means your logic needs to be checked. Please go back, check your program, read the problem statement again, see whether you are able to work your program for all sorts of conditions in the problem statement, and then submit it again.
Yeah, and I think once the deadline is over, along with the model solutions, the hidden test cases will also be revealed.
Yes, all the test cases will be shown, including the hidden test cases. So after the deadline, you can come back and see what were the hidden test cases. I think lots of other question int void we have discussed. Main as void main we have discussed. A presentation error we have discussed. Matrix without array we have discussed. Uh, Coding contest. I think this should be the last question, Satya, and it's an important question because you would encounter this with your students at IIT Kanpur. So please answer that, and then we will close the live class.
Yeah, so okay, the question is not clear. What does that mean? What is the main basis or the concept of coding behind coding contest?
I think what they're trying to say is what are companies trying to look for when they ask students to write a code as part of placement or as part of a competition.
So I guess, as far as I understand, there are two issues here. One is to test your algorithmic thinking. So there is a particular way of solving a problem. This is what is known as an algorithmic approach to solving a problem. Now, you can look for a solution to a problem, and once you have a solution, one of the issues is this the fastest possible method? Maybe there are cleverer algorithms which can solve the problems much faster. So one of the issues that these interviews look for is to test your algorithmic thinking, which is why um, a good interview will give you fresh questions. The idea is that, in some sense, you have to think on the spot so that you can exhibit that your approach to a problem is fairly systematic. And
Yeah.
the other aspect to it, once you have an algorithm, is that you can um, code it up and make it executable and pass pass all the test cases, including boundary conditions and so on. So this tests your coding skill, which is ultimately what is really important, because it's not enough to just come up with an algorithm that is it is so complicated that nobody can code it up. So technically, you can say that it is fast, but there's no easy way to code that. So these coding interviews that companies conduct test both the skills. It's not about asking algorithms that you already know. It is intended to force you to think about a new problem and code it up, which is essentially what the industry is looking for in a programming.
Yeah, I
Because
think you're right in that, and Google interviews definitely look for these two things, and also sometimes the students do not come up with the right answer, but the person who is interviewing is able to judge the thought process, the problem-solving process that the student is using, and is able to make a decision based on that also. If the approach is good and the direction is good, then the students do get favorable score in the interviews. So I think with that, we will close this live class. Thanks to all the students who are watching. We went to more than 200 views in this class, and it will be available for later viewing on the same YouTube page in a few minutes from now. So thank you, and good evening to everybody.
yeah, thanks. Hope you had some informative sessions here, and we'll hold this periodically. I don't know whether we have scheduled any next one, but yeah, hopefully we can continue having this.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.